Hi, my name is Dennis Beatty. Welcome to another Phoenix LiveView tutorial. A couple of weeks ago, we created a counter together where you could increment and decrement a counter using state managed purely by the backend. The more that I've been playing with it, the more I've realized I think that Phoenix LiveView is a really cool tool that can help you to build real-time apps without all the overhead of having to create a complex front end to go with your backend. With Phoenix LiveView, you can simply just create the backend and it takes care of the front end for you. So today we're going to get into the weeds a little bit more and we're going to build a slightly more complex application. This is going to be a to-do list and it's going to be database backed. Because we're building it to be database backed, you can use the same pattern that we're going to be working with today to add real-time functionality to other business applications without a ton of overhead. So I want to try something a little bit new with this tutorial because it's a bigger project. All of the code that I'm writing is going to go on GitHub, and I'm going to separate the steps out into separate commits. So the accompanying blog post for this video, I will post in the comments below. So go check that out. And it will have the code snippets already, but each section will also have a little GitHub icon next to the title of the section. And if you click on that GitHub icon, it will take you to the commit that has all the code that I wrote for that section. So if you get lost at any point, you're welcome to just use GitHub and grab the code from there to get kind of a clean start and catch back up. So to start out, we're going to create a new Phoenix LiveView project. Now, a lot of this is boilerplate, and I should probably add that the API for LiveView still isn't 100% stable. So I'm going to be setting that up, and I would recommend that you use the Phoenix LiveView repository on GitHub. It has a pretty good README with installation instructions. I'm going to have you just follow that. I will show how I'm installing it here. So if you want, you're welcome to follow along. I'm going to speed it up and I'm not going to talk through it. So yeah, if you want, you're welcome to use that, but I recommend using the GitHub instructions just so you know that you're using the most up-to-date instructions. So with that being said, the very first thing we want to do is just create a new Phoenix project. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with mix phoenix.new, and then we'll call this LiveView to-dos. And so from here, it's going to go quiet, and I'll be back in a minute as soon as this is done installing. Okay, so there you have it. We should have our project all set up for Phoenix LiveView now. One thing that I am going to do is I'm going to reopen my project in Atom. And this is because Atom normally does not have LiveEEX templates enabled. And so by reopening in development mode, I've actually modified Atom configuration so that we get code and syntax highlighting there. And so, yeah, now we'll have that. So let's go ahead, and the next thing we want to do is generate kind of our data schema. So instead of doing that manually, we will just use the generators for that. So if we use mix phoenix.gen context, then we will call our context to-dos, and then our schema will be to-do, and then the table for that will be called to-dos lowercase, and that's going to have a title that's a string, and it's going to have done, and that'll be a Boolean value. So let's go ahead and create that, and then we'll go ahead and migrate our database. I still haven't created mine, so if you still need to do that, go ahead and put the mixextra.create in there. Otherwise, you can just use mixextra.migrate. And that's going to take a second to compile. Uh-oh, what did I do? Oh, well, it looks like this is conflicting with my test project, so I'm actually just going to do a mixextra.reset, which is going to wipe out the current database and then build the new one. So that's all done. So now let's go ahead and set up a page. So usually when I do this, I like to start kind of at the router level. And so I'm going to open up my router, and you'll notice that we have this route for the page controller here. So in the last tutorial, we created a new live route here that pointed directly to a live view. This time though, let's go ahead and stick with the page that's already there and then render our live component into it. So our page controller, if we look at that, it's rendering, and when it does that, it's going through our page view, and our page view is going to tell it to render the template. It's going to start with the layout that's here at app.html.eex. And you'll notice that this is calling this render view module, view template, and assigns. And so what that does is Phoenix is already assigned a view module, and that's based on the controller we're going through. And so that view module is this page view. And then this view template, this is getting assigned in our page controller when we say to use the index.html template. And then it passes our assigns through. So we're going to go in a little bit deeper, and we'll go ahead and go into that page template. So page index. And in here, we're currently rendering kind of all of this just default code that ships with Phoenix. And so we're going to go ahead and in here, we're going to tell it to go ahead and render our live view. So I'm just going to put a little header, and I'll just say to-do list. And then below that, we're going to go ahead and use the live render function. And so what this is going to do is it's going to tell it that we want to render this live view. And so now we have this layout template, which was here, and that's rendering our view template, and that is rendering our live view. If that seems complicated, you should see some of the kind of the React apps that we work on at Podium, where we have components, rendering components, and it goes pretty deep. So now that we're telling our page to render a live view, let's go ahead and create that live view. So in lib or library, live view to do's web, let's create a new folder and we'll call it live. And then we'll create a new file in there and we'll call it to do live. So we're going to give it the standard mount and render functions. So let's define our module. So live view to do's web dot to do live, and then we're going to say use phoenix.liveview, and then let's create our mount function, and that's going to take in our session, and it's going to take in a socket, and then we're going to return OK with our socket, and then we'll create our render function. And that's going to take in the list or struct of assigns. And then we want to actually, we'll use the live view sigil and say rendering live view. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to say mix phoenix.server. Okay, and webpack is going to run. And so now, if I go to localhost 4. Okay, now we have our Phoenix framework, and it's showing our to-do list with render live view. So this is rendering that live view because it's showing this. So now what we want to do is we want to load in our to-do list so that we can actually render a to-do list. So let's go ahead and update our mount function to look like this. So we'll say, well, start with alias liveview to-dos dot to-dos, and then in place of our socket, we'll say assign to the socket to-dos equals to-dos dot list to-dos, and this is just a convenience function that comes with our when we generated our schema and our context. And so it just says select everything that we have in the to-dos table, and we'll go ahead and output it. And so with this, we're going to be getting the list of to-dos. So if you look at Phoenix, if we refresh this page, you'll see here that we have this query. So we're saying select everything from the to-dos. So we are getting that list, but we still aren't displaying it. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to want to do is create a new live template. And so let's go into our templates directory, create a new folder, and we'll call it to-do. And then create a new file within that, and we'll call it todos.html.leex for that live EEX file. Okay, so what we'll want to do is loop over our to-dos. So we'll say for to-do in the to-dos that were assigned to our socket. We'll loop over each one, and we'll create a div. And that div will contain the to-do.title. And then we'll close our div, and we will end our loop. Okay, and so then let's go back to our live file, and we'll replace our LiveView sigil code with toDoView.render, and then we'll say todos.html, and then pass in our assigns. And so with that done, we should be able to refresh this page. Oh, what's it saying? Module toDoView is not available. Oh, I skipped a step. So in our views folder, we want to create a new file called toDoView. And that should just say, we'll define a module, we'll call it LiveView todos web.toDoView. And then we'll say use LiveView todos web. We'll use the view function in there. So now if we refresh, okay, why is that not working? Do we maybe need to recompile? That's not good. Oh, you know what we did is never aliased our view. So if we alias LiveView todos web.toDoView, then we try it again. There we go. So you'll notice that we have our header, but then there's nothing under it, and that's because there are no to-dos in our database. So the next thing we want to do is make it so that we can actually create those to-dos. Also, I don't know if any of you speak Spanish, but it's super weird for me to keep saying to-dos and to-do and keep seeing that, because todo means like everything, or todos is like everyone, and so it's super weird, but the word to-do is just really weird. So anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and create a to-do. So at the top of our template, so I'm going to close most of these files since we're not really using most of them. So in our in our todos.html.leex file, the top of that, let's go ahead and create a new form. So we'll say form action is the Octothorpe, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then we'll say Phoenix submit is add. And so what this is going to do is it'll say that whenever we submit the form, it's going to call the add handler that we define. So we'll get to that in a second. And so then we want to say we want a text input, and we'll call that to-do title. And then we'll put placeholder text. It says, what do you want to get done? And then finally, we will submit, well, we'll add a button to submit the form, and it will just say add. And then we'll use another thing called Phoenix disable with, and then the text adding with 3 dots. So this Phoenix disable with is also really cool. Basically what it says is while after our form is submitted, we disable it so that it can't get clicked again. so that the user doesn't click it over and over and accidentally perform the same action multiple times while our server is doing some processing. So it's kind of a handy little thing. So let's go ahead and look, and that's showed up thanks to the live reloading in our dev server. So if we want to create something, and I hit add, you'll notice that it actually fails. It didn't add the thing. And that's because we still haven't defined our handler. So if we look, you'll see we have this giant error block. And this actually gives us exactly what we're looking for. So it says it's trying to call handle event, and the event is called add. And then it's sending in to do as an object or as a map that has a title key with the value some task. And so what we want to do, and then the third argument is the socket. So what we want to do is we want to actually handle this event. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to copy this to make things a little bit easier. And so if we go into our to-do live file, and then we say def, and then I'm going to paste, and then we have the socket. So our title will be, actually, I'm just going to take this part here. We'll say to do. And so then we can just say, okay, whenever we get the new data in for a to do, we want to create that to do using our context. And then we'll reply, well, what we want to do is we want to reply not just with the socket, but with the new list of to-dos, so that that'll update whenever a new one is added. So since we're doing that both here and here, I'm going to go ahead and create a nice little function to make that a little easier. So let's call it fetch. And so we'll pass in the socket, and then we'll say assign socket. And we're basically just going to do exactly what's up here. So we'll say to-dos, to-dos.list to-dos. And so with that, we can say fetch socket here. And then we can do the exact same thing right here. Okay, so now when I create a new to-do item, so you can see I've been playing around with this a little bit. When I create a new item, hit add, it still breaks, and that's because I've noticed you still need to refresh for some reason. But after it's been refreshed, then you can do it, and it should work like a charm. So we can add several of these, and you'll notice that they're all showing up there. But there's one other thing that I think that we should really add to make this a little bit cooler. Like, I think this is already super cool. We were able to make this list that updates itself. We didn't have to write any JavaScript. But what I want to do is make it so that you can run this across multiple windows at the same time. So right now, if I add a task, it gets added here, but over here I have to refresh it for that same task to show up. So instead what I want to do is make it so that it'll get communicated across both browser sessions at the same time. So while Phoenix LiveView is kind of the star of the show in this tutorial, it has an older brother called Phoenix PubSub. And Phoenix LiveView is actually using Phoenix PubSub under the hood because that's what Phoenix channels use, and that's what Phoenix LiveView is built on top of. And Phoenix PubSub is really cool. If you haven't used it before, it allows you to set up subscriptions within your application so that various processes can listen to topics, and anytime there's an update to that topic, your process will get an update and be able to handle that update and do something with it. So what we're going to want to do here is the process that manages these LiveView components is not the same as the process that is updating the database. It might be, but it's not guaranteed to be. So what we want to do is we'll have the LiveView process subscribe to updates using Phoenix PubSub that are made to the to-dos table. So luckily Phoenix PubSub comes bundled with Phoenix by default, so all we have to do is use it. So to start off, let's add a function in our to-dos context, and just add it here at the very bottom, and we'll call it subscribe. And we'll say phoenix.pubsub.subscribe, and then we'll say LiveView todos.pubsub. So by default, it's just gonna be your application name .pubsub, and then we need a topic. So for a topic, let me just make that module attribute that we can have here at the top of the file. So we'll call it topic, and we're just going to say we'll just use the module name. And because it has to be a string, we're using inspect to turn our module name into a string. Okay, so now we have our subscribe function. So now in our mount, I don't know why I closed the live view. In our mount, we can go ahead and call that. So todos.subscribe. Okay, so now when we mount the new live view, it's going to go ahead and subscribe to that. What we need to do next is handle the events that come in. So our live view events come in as handle event. PubSub events are going to come in as handle info. And so they will pass a tuple that will contain to-dos, because that's the module name, right? And then we're going to make it so that it will pass a list that has, so it'll be anything to-do related. We'll have to-do as the first argument in that list. And then it will take in our socket as the final parameter. So we'll return no reply, and then we'll run our fetch function, because anytime that the database changes on the to-dos table, we want to go ahead and fetch all of our to-dos to display the updated list. So if you really wanted to get fancy, you could try diffing the to-dos yourself here instead of fetching all the to-dos from the database every time, especially once this database gets very big. This would be very inefficient, but for the sake of keeping this tutorial simple, I'm just going to stick to loading from the database each time. But if you manage to do the diffing, I'd love to see the code that you use to make it work. Please reach out to me if you do. But now that we're subscribing and handling events, we need to actually broadcast those from our to-dos context. So let's go ahead and create another function here, and we'll call it broadcast change. And so anytime let's see, we'll just take in an OK and result tuple, and then an event. And then we'll call phoenix.pubsub.broadcast LiveView todos.pubsub, and then our topic. And then we're going to pass the actual event. So we'll use the module. And this is, notice we had our module here. So that's just where it's coming from. And then the event itself. And that's something that we'll pass in when we call this function. And then the result. And so that's going to be if we want to see what the actual change was. So this could help with your diffing function later on. We won't be using it right now, but I'm adding that just so that you'll have it if you want it. And so then we'll just return OK result. Okay, so then to make this all work, let's go ahead and add this to all of our functions that'll mutate our data. So just right here, we'll just say broadcast change. And then the So it's already going to be passing in that OK result that comes from the repo.insert. So then the next thing that it needs to be passed is the actual event. And so, like I said, we'll start with the to-do just to say this is what's being affected right now. And then we'll just say created. So that if we want to have different handlers for when it's created versus updated versus deleted, we can handle those differently. So we'll copy that, and then we'll use that again, but change it to updated, and finally to deleted. And this is just kind of a habit, but I always like to start my pipelines with a variable instead of a function call. So I'm just going to change that real quick, but that's not really important. Okay, so that's all there is to it, really. So if we go ahead and I'm just going to refresh both of these to make sure that they're in the right state. But now if we add a new to-do, we'll see that it gets added on both sides of the list. And so in my mind, this is amazing. Like, basically, I think that the applications for this are endless. So I don't know if there's ever been a way to build something like this with so little effort. And I'm really excited to see what you all build. If you watch on Twitter, I've been seeing a lot of really cool applications of Phoenix LiveView for games and for other things. And I just think that it has so much potential. So please show me what you build. And we're going to add one more functionality to this before we end. So basically, because this is a to-do list, I feel like we need to actually mark these items as done. So let's go back to we'll go back to our template. So todos.html. So in our template, we're just displaying each one as just a title. So let's go ahead and change that a little bit. So I'm going to say inside of our div, we want our title still, but I also want a checkbox. So we'll say checkbox with to do done, and then the value will be to do.done. So basically what that's saying is we want to build a checkbox. It's part of this to do, and then it's going to be called done, and then it's going to take from to do.done to know whether or not to check it. So you'll see all these checkboxes got added, but we can't see because if I check these, it's not actually doing anything right now, saving anything in the database. So just to kind of show you how this is working, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just run in pSQL. Mine is SQL just because I have an alias in there. But I'll just say update to-dos, set done equals true, where ID equals 1. And I just remembered I need to actually connect to the right database. So LiveView to-dos dev. And then we'll go ahead and run that. So now if I refresh, you'll notice that that first one I put in is now checked. So it looks like that logic is working fine. But now let's make it so that we can actually check those in the front end and have that saved. So let's change our checkbox. So we have our value already. Let's go ahead and add on to the end of it Phoenix click. And so this creates a click event handler. And we'll tell it that when it's clicked, we want to call the handle done event. And we use Phoenix value. And this is something that's kind of new. I didn't talk about this in the last tutorial, but this allows us to specify a custom value to be passed through. So we'll say we want to pass the ID. So we'll say that it's done, and we'll say this is the to-do that we want to mark as done. So we'll save that. And just to kind of show you the functionality, if I click on one of these, I think I need to refresh again. I click on one of these. Oh, I probably don't. There's probably an error here. Yep. So you'll see we're getting this nice little error block. And we're getting the same thing. So we have this handle event, and then we're saying toggle done, and then the ID that we clicked on, and then passing through our socket. So I'm just going to copy that again. And let's go into our live file and handle this other event. So if I paste that in, and then we'll say socket. So this 3 will be the to-do ID that we're working with. And so basically what we want to do is we want to say, let's go ahead and get the to-do that has that ID, and then we'll update it. To-do, we'll take the to-do, and then we'll change its done to be the opposite of what it currently is. And finally, say, okay, let's get all the new data and put it on the socket. So if we do that, then if I refresh both of these and I say get it done, then we're seeing that these are getting checked on both sides, which is awesome. However, because we're using the broadcast in our context, we actually don't even need to fetch here. Because when this update to do happens, it should be broadcasting to us so that we're updating our socket already. That's just a hypothesis, but I'm curious to see what happens. So if I say some task, yeah, and it's still happening. And now we're doing one less query than we would have been otherwise. So that's always good. Okay, well, that's basically the end of the tutorial that I had planned. So basically we just created a simple to-do list with Phoenix LiveView. Didn't take too long to implement. It looks like I'm looking at about 36 minutes right now. It'll probably be shorter once I speed up the boilerplate code. But like I said before, Phoenix LiveView is awesome. Chris McCord and the rest of the maintainers have done a really great job with implementing this. That being said, I think that Phoenix PubSub is just as awesome, even though it doesn't get as much glory anymore. I think that it's super amazing too. Basically, it made it super simple for us to subscribe to events and publish those whenever we're updating our database, and that allowed us to get all of this set up really quickly. So I'd highly recommend spending some time getting a little more familiar with PubSub, because it can be a very powerful tool in your arsenal to build real-time applications. So if you want to keep going with this project, the next thing I'd recommend doing is adding a delete functionality. So the to-dos context already has a delete to-do function, and it should already be publishing to PubSub. So all you need to do is hook that up in your template and create an event handler for it in your live view. If you do that, or if you add anything else to this project, please reach out to me on Twitter and show me what you've done. I always love seeing all the projects that you guys do, especially as a result of these tutorials. So if you like this, please subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have more people seeing these videos, and it just helps me to, I guess, feel a little bit more proud of what I'm creating and enjoy the process a little bit more, knowing that people appreciate it. So please like the video and subscribe. You can also retweet it. I'll have a link to the tweet in the description below. And I plan to continue releasing new YouTube videos with accompanying blog posts at least once a month, usually more frequently than that. So hopefully you'll catch another video. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you'd like to see me cover. Thanks for